Yeah, let's talk about the some of the different parts of
Yeah,
Yorba Linda. So
yeah, absolutely. So as you can see here on the map, you've got the red border, which is the city of Yorba Linda. Last census I looked at, we're at about 68 to 69,000 in population. And the city has three zip codes. Two are technically residential zip codes. The third zip code is for PO boxes only. So we really only have kind of a split city, if you will, two zip code city. I know there's cities out there that have, 15 different zip codes. So it's a pretty straightforward city with regards to, um, the residential side. I'm a residential real estate broker, have been in the business 20 years. The area that you see outlined here makes up roughly about, I want to say 20 square miles. 19 and a half of that is land. We don't have a lot of water. You see a little bit of water right here, which is a private lake. It's East Lake, makes up about 15. That's, in fact, you can see it behind me. That's an aerial photo of the East Lake community, which is basically right here. You
got
see
it.
this little pocket of water. So this lake is about 15 acres. Was the community itself, the East Lake community itself, 1970s, 1990s, includes about 9 subdivisions and about 850 acres of landmass with residential, mainly residential properties. So this is a private lake for the community. So it has a homeowners association, very, very reasonable. So if you are a homeowner of East Lake and you pay your association dues, then you have access to this lake. It's all electronic boats, no power, engine motors. There's some fishing allowed. They have great events at East Lake throughout the year. They have the 4th of July event, great Christmas parade. It takes place at this location. The homeowners with boats will decorate their boats, and they have like a really cool boat parade that goes through here. So a very big draw. There's a lot of events that the community in East Lake put on every year. So it's a great place to live. But it's pretty much, other than maybe a little bit of water at a golf course or something, it's pretty much your only water mass that you're going to see in Yorba Linda. Now, when you go a little bit more east over into this area, as you start to go toward Corona, which is the border of Riverside County, you're going to get into Bryant Ranch area. And sorry, excuse me. Excuse me. So you're going to get into the Bryant Ranch area up in here. And again, primarily residential. You do have some retail up into this area. You have the Susanna Bixby Bryant Museum and Botanic Garden. Great place to go visit. This area along the 91 freeway of Yorba Linda, much of this area is designated a bird sanctuary. So you got a ton of waterfowl birds. You got a ton of different species of birds in and around this part of Yorba Linda, which is awesome. It's really cool. I actually live right in this general area of Yorba Ranch and Esperanza, and we've just got birds
Hmm,
everywhere. It's really, really cool.
nice.
Um, so this area, Bryant Ranch, get a lot of wind, because I know that part of talking about any city, you've got pros and cons, right?
Yep.
So you do get a lot of wind, and you are more susceptible to fire because of where you back up. You can see here, I mean, you've got housing tracks that back up to Chino Hills Park, and if that's where the fire originated, you run the risk of being evacuated. So when we hear of fire evacuations, this section of the city is typically what we see being evacuated in most cases.
Hmm,
Occasionally, it might be a little bit more northwest, but this is pretty much where you're going to see a lot of that evacuation take place.
hmm.
As you go east to west from Bryant Ranch into the main part of Yorba Linda, because Bryant Ranch isn't going to make up your largest portion of the community from a mass standpoint.
Hmm.
It's more of it is one of the two zip codes, but it's a smaller section. The main mass of your Yorba Linda community and your population, if you will,
Hmm.
is going to be centrally located between Imperial and the border of Placentia and probably right over into this area before you get into Bryant Ranch. So this is going to be the majority of your community. Now, Yorba Linda, homes back in the 70s, of course, maybe even earlier than that, and as new construction in the 2000s and 10, 15, and so on, which is going to be more in your northern part of Yorba Linda. So that's kind of just an overview of, again, only 2 zip codes we're dealing with, but from east to west is kind of an overview of the city.
The north has been more developed more recently.
Yeah, when you get into Yorba Linda High School, which is going to be one of your newer high schools, we have 2 primary high schools in Yorba Linda, Esperanza and Yorba Linda, Yorba Linda High. So anything north of Bassin Cherry, when you get right here and you go north, this is going to be a newer community. You got new development as early as 3-4 years ago, new home tracks. So you got more development that has taken place up in this area. You get back down into our East Lake area, you're in the 70s to 90s range. You get over into this area, you're probably even into the 60s and 50s. But yeah, the newer development area, it's going to be more in that. When I say newer, probably within the last 5 to 10 years is going to be a little bit more northern Yorba Linda.
Right, which is relatively new because the city, it's quite an old city, right, for California standards.
Well, I mean, you could go, I mean, any city, and I mean, anywhere in the US, but you can go back 4,000 years and, there were Indian tribes that, just had landmass all over, from San Bernardino to, you name it. My understanding is there were 3 main tribes, again, 4,000 years ago, that took up a lot of the landmass that we know of, that we now know today, being Orange County in Southern California and things like that. Yorba Linda, the name itself, was generated by a gentleman from a gentleman by the name of Don Bernardo Yorba, and Linda is Spanish for beautiful. And Don Bernardo Yorba was granted somewhere in the neighborhood of about 14,000 acres that took up a lot of the Orange County area at the time, of which Yorba Linda was part of that. And he built a home here. He was 58, I think, when he passed away in 1858. So we can go back all the way to the 1800s as far as, the city, the history behind Yorba Linda, if you will. He was a very successful rancher in California. At one point, he was the second wealthiest individual in the whole 19th century period. Wow. I believe at one point he was the second largest landowner in California, but very successful rancher. He was married 3 times, 15 children. And he had a home. I'll blow it was called the Yorba Hacienda. It's a California Historic Landmark 226 currently today. And let me get my bearings. There we go. Let me pull this up. So his hacienda, his property was right here. If you go to Esperanza Road, if you're ever in the area, and you go to Echo Hill Lane, there'll be a monument as you enter that housing tract right where my mouse is at. And there is a California historic monument right there, which is, it's a stone monument. Many say the stones were made from some of the adobe that he built his home with or from. And there's a bronze plaque that talks about some of the history behind him. And so this is where his property was. It was one of the largest homes ever built back in those days. There's been reports of anywhere from 80 to 200 rooms in this house at one point. So it's kind of crazy. But this is where his family lived. And you can see here to the left, there is a historic Yorba cemetery. This cemetery is very interesting. It's only open for a tour 1 day a month, the first Saturday of every month, except in May, between 10 and 11 o'clock. So if you want to ever look it up and check it out, historic Yorba Cemetery was part of his land. It sat right beneath the hill of his hacienda. In fact, himself, his second wife, and I believe 8 of his children are buried at this cemetery. when he passed away in the late fifth or early mid 50s, sorry, 58, he was originally buried in Los Angeles at a cemetery. And when that cemetery closed and this cemetery was open, if you will, as a private cemetery, it's I think one of the oldest private cemeteries in the country. His remains were moved in the early 1900s. And so some of his descendants and some of his family and are currently buried there. There's about 400 grave sites there. You can drive by and you can see it, but you can't access it except for that tour. So it's kind of cool. There's a little bit of a local legend behind the cemetery. Some of you, if you're watching the video, may have heard of it, called the Pink Lady. The Pink Lady apparently emerges from the cemetery on June 15th. I don't know why that day. There's never been any documented sightings of her as a ghost, but there has been levels of energy that have been tested there, that sense of spirit, I guess, which is just a kind of cool little local legend. She was a descendant of Yorba, Bernardo Yorba, and story is that she passed away in a carriage accident coming back from a high school dance, and her spirit still apparently lives on. And I think her name, I got a note here, Alvina de los Reyes. So if you're ever interested, if you're into ghosts, check out historic Yorba Cemetery and the Pink Lady, and you'll get a lot of history on it. It's kind of cool.
Interesting. And so that tour they do, it's simply to kind of like visit the gravesite of
correct
the founder.
Visit the cemetery.
Yeah.
I have not personally ever been on that tour, so I can't speak about the tour itself because I've never been on it. But my understanding is there's a tour guide, talks about the history of the cemetery. It is currently, and I don't recall the exact year, but the County of Orange privately took over that property. There was a time period where this cemetery was vandalized and it just basically was non-existent. It was technically restored, is my understanding, and it's privately owned by the County of Orange, and the Parks and Recreation maintain it. So it is considered a historic cemetery. It's not technically open to the public at any given time like some cemeteries might be. But it's kind of cool if you're ever interested and you're into that kind of stuff. It's worth looking up. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. Yeah, like urban legend kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Cool little story.
Yeah,
and that's actually not far. I've actually ridden my bike down there and taken a run down that way. And, I've seen the monument and stuff like that. So it's kind of neat.
If you like what you're hearing so far, check out the full episode right